Hello, everyone. Welcome to Feedstuffs 365. I'm Sarah Muirhead. Some 879 million acres of U.S. farmland is currently used for solar. What opportunities might that offer cattle ranchers? Is it possible to graze cattle under solar panels, and are there any benefits from doing so? Joining us today to discuss Cattlevoltaics is Jeff Risley, Executive Director of the Renewable Energy Farmers of America. Welcome, Jeff. Thank you for joining us here today.
You bet, Sarah. I really appreciate being on.
For those of you in our audience that are tuning in, we appreciate you being here. If you have any questions, feel free to post those there in the chat area on your screen. If you're joining us from social media, post your questions directly in your social feed. So, Jeff, let's start with having you give us a bit of your background and explain to us what REFA is and why it was created to support farmers and ranchers navigating these projects.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I actually grew up on a farm in Western Kansas. We still have that farm in the family, and we have actually leased our land as part of a potential wind and solar farm development that may or may not happen. That's kind of how these go. But so we've eaten a little bit of our own cooking. I am not farming. I am, the executive director of REFA, which is a new national nonprofit farm trade group. We started early in 2025, we launched publicly in July of this year. And our mission is really straightforward. We want to help farmer and rancher landowners navigate these renewable energy opportunities. And as they're pretty immense projects. They can be very complex. And there's really nobody, at least nationally, from a membership organization standpoint, that is helping those farmers and ranchers kind of step by step through the process. So I always say we're like any farm commodity association. We just happen to advise on a different crop, and that's wind, solar, storage, agrivoltaics, which we're going to talk a little bit about today, and even high voltage transmission.
Always good to have someone who has got some knowledge to, shed some light on some of these topics. And now some people may be hearing the term for the first time. I'm hearing it for the first time. Cattlevoltaics. What is it, and why is it gaining attention among ranchers?
Yeah, so cattlevoltaics is really just a fancy word for cattle grazing on the same land that you'll have a solar array project. So it's really a subset of what we call agrivoltaics or dual use. Agrivoltaics is, the idea of continuing to farm or have something in production while you have a solar array on the land. And so, cattlevoltaics, this term came about because there's been several projects, I'll call them demonstration projects and research projects, where cattle are being grazed with solar. Most of the agrivoltaics in the United States are sheep grazing. So in fact, there's probably over 600 agrivoltaic sites total in the United States right now. And most of those are sheep. There's probably between 8 and 20 projects in the US that are cattle. And that's a mix of, operating, farm operating situations where there's, cattle grazing with these solar arrays. And there's also research, the University of Minnesota at Morris, Rutgers University. There's even a project in Kansas at Tiffany Cattle Feedlot that's got solar in the corners of the pen. It's on a high post and it's up above in the air, but lots of interesting demonstration projects right now. I would call it, Sarah, early days, but a very interesting and emerging field.
Of course, solar panels would also give shade for the cattle, and that has probably some impact then on comfort, heat stress, forage conditions, maybe in the pasture. What are you seeing in some of those areas?
Yeah, the research so far is showing very positive results. So as heat stress on cattle is a big deal. It's an expensive proposition. So the research that was done specifically at the University of Minnesota found that temperatures would drop about half of a degree in the cattle who were under that particular shaded area. And it even dropped their respiration. They got it specifically from like 78 breaths to 66 breaths per minute. So they're really doing some good research to find out how this can positively impact the cattle themselves. But then there's the impact to the soil. I mean, the idea that cattle are able to still graze on it, still work within the land, does all the important things that it does without the solar there. And we've also seen research that shows, especially for grasses, there's an improvement under the panels because of shading. There's a chance for that land to get a little less sun on it in the day. And so overall, it's been good for both the land and the cattle.
And also for ranchers, if they want to keep their land in pasture, right? I mean, they have to, so we figure out how they can graze under those solar panels to help maintain that working land model that they're looking for.
Exactly right. So the beauty of something like cattle grazing with solar is it's a chance to essentially keep the land in production, and in some cases, keep the family farm generation over generation. The income stream from these leases can be significant for the landowners. In fact, there's 3 ways this landowner could be making money. There's the chance of leasing it to the solar developer. There's the option in some cases where the developer will pay the rancher to maintain the grass under the panels, because if there were no cattle there, they would have to maintain that by mowing. So the cattle serve as the mowers for the solar company, so you can get a contract for that as well. And then there's, of course, the sale of the cattle themselves. So you've kind of got 3 income streams there versus 1. And we know, agriculture is a risky business, and oftentimes an extra income stream can be the difference between make or break from a profitability standpoint.
Exactly. Now, REFA's mission is to protect landowner rights and long-term stewardship. How does that show up when ranchers are evaluating cattlevoltaics or any solar opportunity for that matter?
Yeah, it's a great question. We are founded on that idea of property rights. It's an important right that landowners have. And the idea that these projects can have a lifespan of, anywhere from 25 to 40 years. So the great thing about a solar project is it doesn't take the land out of production forever versus urban sprawl or residential development, for example. So the chance that this could come out through decommissioning in the future is very real. But the way we try to help our members with those long-term thinking is really several stages, but it all begins with the leasing process. So, REFA is a member organization. One of the services we provide, in addition to education and peer-to-peer networking and advocacy, are professional services like non-legal lease reviews. So we'll look at a lease, help a farmer understand, the implications of that lease, and look for the things that are going to be very important, especially in an agrivoltaic project. That sets them up for longer term success with the developer, and protects everything from the soil to their income to whether the project gets sold or not. All of these things that most farmers and ranchers just don't have experience with. That's partly why we created REFA.
So from a ranch management standpoint, what questions should a producer ask if a developer approaches them about a solar installation on their land? There must be some kind of checklist or something that you folks work through.
Yeah, there is. And, we can definitely assist in that area. But some of the things you're going to want to think about are, okay, what's the first thing I always say is understand your land the way the developer understands your land. So we actually offer a service called landscape analysis that looks at the buildability of your land. It's a tool that the developers use as well that we use. And it'll set you up to be able to speak to the developer in a way that says, look, I know a lot about my ground. I know where I have potential species issues. I know where I might have, water issues, or whatever it may be. So know your land like the developer does. The other things you're looking for are really buried in the lease, decommissioning. So making sure that there's bonds in there so that later on, if the project has to be decommissioned, it can get paid for. What happens if the developer sells the project? You want to make sure that everything you negotiated in that lease sticks around if the project gets sold. What are the impacts on my on my farm programs by doing something like this. So all of these are things that we can help guide a landowner through, and even in some cases help them negotiate with the developer, or even groups of landowners negotiating with the developer, that if there are multiple landowners impacted by a project.
Yeah, because most renewable energy leases, I'm assuming, are long-term commitments in most regards. How does REFA then help ranchers understand those contracts, what they mean for their land and future operations?
Yeah, a lot of it is, in the details of the lease itself, but we're trying to do it in a way that makes sense for the landowner. We call it farmer first. So we're thinking about the lease from the farmer's perspective versus the developer's perspective. And we partner with Pinion, who you may or may not know is a large agriculture services company. They've been around forever, and they're very knowledgeable in this space. They're also very knowledgeable about tax implications, about operations, about soil management when it comes to renewables. And all of these services are available to our members via Pinion through us. So by having that partnership, we've got a true kind of farmer first, ag focused process that's going to set that landowner up for success long term.
We also hear a lot of probably misinformation around solar farms and livestock. What are the common things that you run into out there when it comes to misconceptions, and what are the real world experiences?
Yeah, that I'm glad you asked, because that's absolutely true. I mean, most people, this is very new to them. It's an energy source that they don't know much about. But some of those common myths that we hear are really about solar's impact on soil. I mean, a solar panel is basically silicone and glass and aluminum. It has very little volatile chemical in it, and it's contained within it. So there have been all kinds of tests done, even at EPA, showing that even if you destroy that panel, it's not going to leach anything into the soil. It's also, we hear things like, okay, will the animals tear up these solar panels? The research so far shows no. Sheep definitely not. Cattle have the capacity to, for sure. But by making some changes to the development itself in terms of panel height, in terms of the type of piles you're using and the size of those, it's an issue that you have to address to make sure that they don't tear up the actual production of energy. And I think the other big one we hear is, well, this is going to take land out of production. And by doing agrivoltaics, it's not. It's actually protecting that ground from being taken out of production for some other reason, because you're able to continue grazing your cattle on it while you're generating energy that you're getting paid for.
So for ranchers who want to explore cattlevoltaics in more detail, but they really don't know where to start, what are the first steps that you would recommend?
Yeah, honestly, we can provide a lot of that information. So we're happy to spread out information we maintain. We keep a vetted database of every kind of information you can think of at the nexus of agriculture and renewable energy. So we can provide a lot of that information. Sources like NREL, or National Renewable Energy Labs, or which now is being referred to as the National Lab of the Rockies, they have a database of agrivoltaic projects that you can learn a lot about through their Inspire program. There's, of course, DOE. They maintain a lot of information, Department of Energy. But I would say that it's not something that has been centralized into a single organization focused on helping farmers and ranchers until REFA came about. And we saw that gap and thought, boy, we could really help these folks if we do that. So we're a great source to start with.
Well, and I know sometimes solar panels are lower to the ground. And of course, the ones we're talking about are high enough to have cattle graze under them. That's probably something you need to explore too with whatever developer is coming in, like what panels would they allow this? Just make sure you've got all of that figured out ahead of agreeing to anything, I would assume.
Absolutely. If there's one piece of advice I would give, it's before you sign a lease, please reach out to someone, reach out to us, because once you've signed that lease, you're locked in. It's very difficult to make changes to it. And, sometimes farmers feel pressure from the developer to sign that. We don't want that at all. You're in the driver's seat as much as the developer is. It's your land, it's your legacy, it's your livelihood. And you have a lot more power than you think you do. You just need an advocate to help you walk through the process. So that's always my advice is talk to somebody before you sign that lease to make sure, because that sets up everything for success, all the way through construction, maintenance and operations of that project over the next 40 years, and then ultimately decommissioning.
So then what would you say? What does success look like for ranchers who choose to integrate grazing with solar, and both financial standpoint and a stewardship standpoint? How do you see that?
I would say, Sarah, that you can kind of look at it in a broad view and in a very detailed view. On a broad view, success looks like maintaining this generation to generation. I mean, a lot of times, farmers and ranchers can't do that just by farming and ranching. And it's become difficult to pass on their land. So a big source of success would be, can I continue to allow my family to farm and ranch our generational land? I would say on a more micro scale, it's absolutely, is this adding to my profit per acre? Am I able to provide an income stream that's improving my business year over year in a way that is less volatile? This is, these aren't marketing-based leases. They're not market-based. They're paid to you every month, regardless. I also think you have to look at success in terms of the impact on my animals and the impact on my land and my soil. And all of the research we've been seeing, especially with agrivoltaics, is showing that the soil actually gains. It does well under these situations. It doesn't do poorly. And the animals themselves do as well. So if you're not getting some of those results, it could be by the way you've designed this particular solar array or this particular solar farm. So again, finding good help to make sure those success metrics are in place is really important.
Any final thoughts or key takeaways you'd like to leave our audience with today, Jeff?
I guess I would just say, check us out. We're at renewableenergyfarmers.org. We charge $250 a year for membership. It's definitely something that, we can then advise you in a lot of different ways. We have lots of relationships that we can, from a consulting standpoint, to the developers that we know that can also help advise on your situation. But whether you've already hosting a project, you've been approached by a developer with a lease, or you're just curious, we can assist in all of those scenarios.
Very good. Jeff Risley, Executive Director of the Renewable Energy Farmers of America. Thank you, Jeff, for joining us today. Very insightful.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah.
Likewise, we appreciate all of you in our audience for tuning in. Until next time, for Feedstuffs, I'm Sarah Muirhead.